Jahache. Ha tonche don zan na hakani ya la he. Tonche don zan na na chi la he. A zan don e jam. Yi dei zan dan waka ta dan na chi la he. A zan don e hui chi la he. Dan na chi de dan wu zhong zhe ha da. Yi dei zhe wu zhong zhe ne wu zi de ka. I ka la. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Gary Oker. I've just spoke our Beaver language from northeastern British Columbia. I talk about the idea that we come from dreaming traditions. We are dreamers. And I'm here to sing one of our traditional songs by our prophets, Nachine, who Brian is one of the descendants of these great dreamers. As you can see and hear about his work, he comes from that. So I want to honor him with this song. Hey, Brian, it's for you.
Good evening. First of all, I want to welcome everybody and thank Gary very, very much for bringing us all together. I'm Stefan Yost, Michael and Sonia Kerner Director and CEO. We'd like to start by acknowledging we're on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, as well as the Huron-Wendat and Seneca Nations through time. Today is the opening day for an extraordinary exhibition from Brian and Kitty, and it's actually the first major exhibition that we're opening since the introduction of our annual pass and free under 25. We kind of are very committed to showing great art, and I think this is part of it. Learning, having dialogues and conversation, but also making the AGO more accessible. In the last 3 weeks, we've had 21,000 people join the AGO, which is makes me incredibly proud to be in Toronto. Word of mouth is the best thing. Anybody under 25 can get an annual pass to the AGO. If you're over 25, it's $35, which I think is incredibly reasonable for a year to see culture and arts. Just $35 a year for art. So I just want to say thank you for that and tell people, because it makes a difference. These exhibitions that we do are kind of all-in exhibitions. They're unbelievably complex. We've had many, many people who've lent works of art, and they're not cheap. So my job is to thank people. I first want to thank Panasonic. When you see the exhibition, there's great equipment. It's because Panasonic made it work for us. The volunteers of the AGO, we have hundreds of them. They've chipped in significantly. the Schulich Foundation, and Jay and Laura Rapp. We've also had help from the Hal Jackman Foundation, Nancy McCain and Bill Morneau. Bill Morneau, no, might ring a bell. They put in money. Nadir and Shabin Mohammed, the Soberin Family Foundation, Donald R. Sobey, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, and Susan and Greg Guichon. They are lots of people pulling together to make sure that when we do an exhibition, it's done at the right level. We have partners with the Governor of Canada, the Canadian Council for the Arts, and then I want to particularly thank our staff of the AGO. We're 640 people on staff. There's lots of people who make this work. Kitty is leading the creative vision, but there's people in marketing, there's people in finance, et cetera. So I just want to thank everybody on the staff of the AGO. Two works maybe to think about in the show. There's a beautiful little painting about so big. It's a cedar shake, and Brian's gone through and painted each line of the maybe 100 years of lines a different color. I don't think of Brian as a painter, but when I saw that, there's something breathtakingly beautiful. In many ways, I had the same emotional reaction to it as I did to Via Selmans, who's on the 5th floor, also something to look at. So that's one piece. And then the piece I look forward to discovering is there's a 5-channel film video that takes an hour. I haven't seen it yet, but I know that this is the kind of exhibition that you'll see it tonight. There'll be 3,000-5,000 people tonight here. Fantastic. But come back and spend an hour with that film, because I have a feeling I'm going to learn a lot by seeing it. So 2 things to see in the gallery. Make sure you spend time there. And I'm just going to say Kitty Scott is our curator of contemporary art. She's got an extraordinary long relationship with Brian Jungen. Most great relationships are over time and sophisticated. And tonight, they're going to have a conversation. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. It's really great to see everybody here tonight, as almost every chair is full, so thank you for taking the time out of your lives to come this evening and to hear this conversation. I also want to echo Stefan's thank yous. There are many people in the room who helped with this show, and many people who are not in the room, and a big, massive thank you to all of you. If I haven't picked you out by name in the past few days, I just want to say thank you again. It helps us get where we're going, so thank you. So, hello.
Hello, Kitty. How are you?
I'm okay, and you?
Oh, pretty good, holding it together still.
Okay. It's great to see you again. I guess I'm sitting here with an artist who, for over 20 years, has shown himself to be consistently innovative in his approach to materials, be they mass-produced goods or indigenous materials, indigenous technologies. And I'm really pleased to have been working with him for the past little while. We're just going to open up with our first point of discussion. So, Brian Jungen, the title of the exhibition, Friendship Center. How did we land here?
Well, I was invited to exhibit here a couple years ago, and when I had the chance to come out and look at the space, I remarked how much it felt like a gymnasium. I think the architecture of the space and the proportions of the room. And it made me think of a few things. That gymnasiums are center point of meeting for sports and culture in a lot of reserves and First Nations communities across the country, as well as friendship centers in and around Canada. And at one point, about 20 years ago, I had a studio behind this building, the Vancouver Friendship Center, and I spent quite a bit of time there having lunch and meeting folks and from all over BC. And they have a gymnasium there, and they would do like dance practices, and also they play basketball.
We were talking over the past few days, and you talked about sport and ceremony, and I'm just curious to hear you talk a little bit more about that. Your interest in ceremony.
Yeah, I think Gary, who you all just met, my cousin Gary Oker, when he was chief of our band, he was very instrumental in building a new band hall and community center. And in that new building, there's quite a large gymnasium. And I remember going to the opening of the center, and there was a big friendship dance with everybody involved, including members of the non-native community and RCMP and whatnot. And everybody danced in a big circle around in the gymnasium, and I thought it was like a really powerful moment. And so with that, the idea of like mixing a culture in the site of like athletic field essentially was something that kind of infused my later artwork. So. I've been talking to media for the last 3 days, so I'm starting to get all my memories mixed up. So
It's okay. You've been so generous, and just thank you for all that. I'm curious with the gallery space. When you look at it and the way you've I guess transformed the particular space of the Zach's Gallery into the gymnasium, do you think about that particular space in the building as a kind of indigenous space, given what you've just told me about the Friendship
definitely.
Center?
Even when I was doing those drawings, I was thinking about that. And
You mean the drawing of the gym floor?
yeah. So the floor that's in the gallery down there is based on a series of drawings that I did. And so this one is the one we chose. And I was thinking of positioning my artwork within the basketball court, almost like a game or players in a court. And how I wanted to kind of claim that space as First Nations space or like a friendship center. When I first moved to Vancouver, I was quite young. I was 18, and I really didn't know how to. I felt very intimidated being in an art gallery. I didn't really know how to behave or how to even look at art, even though I was in art school. And I kind of wanted to turn that space into somehow to fulfill the function of what a friendship center does. It'd be welcoming and kind of make people feel like it's that the act of being in an art gallery or looking at art is more, I don't know, welcoming or relaxing or more, in a way, sports-like.
It also, links up with the work court that you did. The basketball court that you did on the sewing machine tables some years ago. So there's a direct connection to that. And I think there's also within your work a large group of works that are installations that take up large, or they're sometimes in public space, but they can take up large amounts of space and really use space. So in a sense, I also think about the way you work and the way you've been working with sneakers or Air Jordans and kind of envisioning new potentials for them, that in a sense, you've taken the Zach's Gallery at the AGO and given it a new life in a way.
One side of it, anyways.
What's that?
One side.
Okay.
The other side's still a museum.
Yeah. So think about it a little bit like the way you treat sneakers, anyway. One of the earliest works in the show is a work called Vernacular that you worked on from 1998 to 2001, and I think it's nice to see this for a number of reasons. I think most people who know Brian's work, when they think of him, kind of immediately think of him as a sculptor. That might be the first place you go to, an artist who works with three-dimensional objects. And he also makes really great drawings, and he drew when he was very young, and you also drew with Jeffrey Farmer quite a bit. You kind of had a collaboration there. I'm just curious to hear you talk a little bit about this particular drawing and what's going on in it, and how does it sort of, in a sense, kind of frame your approach to art, or do you think it has that within it somehow?
Well, this particular drawing was just something that I had on the work table for years, and I would kind of like go back to it now and then, and I think it was emblematic of some ideas that have popped up again and again in my artwork, like the geodesic dome, for instance. And
kind of interested in utopian
utopian architecture. But I was mainly drawing figurative stuff back then. You can kind of see that in the drawing, and I was kind of exploring like identity politics strategies in the 90s, and a lot of the drawing I was doing then was kind of meant to be out in public spaces. So I wheat pasted them around the downtown east side and East Vancouver, and that was my early attempts at getting my artwork out into public. And so these big drawings came about when I started to be more self-conscious about where these might wind up. So these are on much better quality paper, and they're not really they weren't really meant to be displayed in the same type of way. So maybe it became a conscious thought to turn toward exhibiting indoors, or like getting away from doing this kind of like street art sensibility.
There's a lot of language, a lot of text in there. You're writing notes in pencil all the time. I'm sorry, it's very hard to read on this particular image, but do you want to talk about that interest in language?
I haven't actually read that in a long time, but I think if you read my first Canada Council grants, you'd probably find a lot of the dialogue in those.
So a study for a Canada Council grant. Well, that's nice. That's nice. And what about animals? You know, there's a lot of animals in that picture as well, and I think animals, let's say, are beings with eyes, maybe? Spirits with eyes turn up in the
my
work.
childhood was spent on our grandparents' cattle ranch, and my family's always been into hunting and fishing in northern BC. And I think that really influenced my life, and you've seen it again and again in my work. And I've worked making environments for pets and whatnot in different projects, and so yeah, that is a reoccurring theme as well.
It's a beautiful drawing. The first time I saw it, I was working at the National Gallery of Canada, and I thought it would make a really great addition to the collection. So it came into the collection of the National Gallery, something I'm very proud of, but also it was really great to board again and have it at the beginning of the exhibition so people could see one of the places you started out, in a sense. It's really nice to have here. So something that you became very well known for in your kind of early stages is a Prototype for New Understanding series, a series of 23 sculptures, which you made, 23 being the number of Michael Jordan's jersey as he was playing basketball, a sport that Torontonians I don't think know too much about. Is that right? But 23. So Brian took apart Air Jordan sneakers early in his career and sewed them back together again to make a series of sculptures resembling Northwest Coast high masks. As I said, we have 20 here. We tried to borrow all 23. We wanted to have all of them, but we managed to get 20. When Brian started this project, he began with the intention of making photographs. And I'm wondering if you could just tell us about the beginning stages of this and how this project went from being photographic to sculptural.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I kind of left working two-dimension drawing. I did a series of kind of a wall drawing project, and that was kind of the last thing that I did like that. And then I got a residency at the Banff Center, and I was kind of trying to conflate a bunch of different ideas that I had, including working with these Air Jordan trainers, which to me really highly resembled a lot of coastal motifs in the nations on the coast, and how these sneakers had become so heavily commodified and fetishized, very much like the artwork that I was referencing. So I was there for, I'd never really made sculpture, so I was very, very careful about how I took them apart, and then I put them together very kind of simply and took photos of them, and I think that's because I was from Vancouver, that I had this impulse to photograph everything, and that would validate it as fine art. But I'm not a very good photographer, so. And then I had 6 more weeks to fill up at the Banff Center, so I decided to go back and stitch them together properly. And then I realized they had a much more powerful presence if they looked like they'd been mass-produced, that they'd actually been factory-made. And that really changed everything. I really felt a real charge from working with objects in sculpture, and I stopped working with drawing and photography, which didn't last that long anyway.
Just to talk a little bit about your trip to the Museum of Natural History and the Nike shop.
Yeah, so that same summer I was in New York, and I was visiting the Museum of Natural History on the Upper West Side, and I was kind of amazed that they still had in their collection artwork from like hydination and stuff that was still in the realm of science and ethnography and anthropology, and then I was like wandered further downtown, and I came across the Nike Town store, and they were displaying their early prototype trainers in these museum cases, and it just kind of coalesced, and that's kind of where the idea came from.
How do you respond to people calling them masks? Are they masks or sculptures?
Well, I think of them more as sculptures, especially these early ones, because they're not really wearable. The later works are now more wearable. You've seen Jasmine maybe tonight. She's wearing one of the new pieces I made, which is more like a war bonnet than a mask, but I am consciously more making them to actually fit the human body now.
A bit more about that later. So cetology, this is second whale. Brian made 3 whales, or sculptures resembling whales, out of white plastic patio chairs. And he was able to sort of somehow find maybe a whalebone in one of those chairs, and then in finding a whalebone, assemble a whole sculpture. Do you want to talk a little bit about the moment you decided to work with this material, how it came about, how you decided you wanted to make a whale?
Yeah, I think
Make 3 whales. Yeah.
I was interested in those. I kept seeing those chairs just like everybody else, like when they're broken, people just chuck them out because you can't really fix them. So, and I did a lot of my research by just photographing things. So I'd photograph pallets and broken pallets and broken chairs and stuff. And then I realized that there was something really kind of liberating about them when they break, that they're no longer used as an object, use object, that I could use them to make something out of. And so I tried different things. Actually, at YYZ here, I made this geodesic dome. And I think 2000, that was really the first time I tried using them for something. You might see video footage of that in the archive, actually, downstairs. But I wasn't really happy with that. And so I returned to the studio and decided to try making something very organic looking out of them. But I was also fascinated in architecture that was made for animals in captivity. So I was going to Stanley Park and photographing the old bear pit and hanging out at the aquarium. And that's kind of where I stumbled upon the history of the whaling industry on the West Coast. And then I read that a lot of cities used to be lit at night by burning whale oil, and that was later replaced by petroleum. And that's kind of where the idea of using these chairs, which are made from petroleum as well, into this very organic object.
How's the plastic holding up? Is it?
It depends where it was made, I think. Some parts are more yellow than others, but yeah, I mean, it's in a controlled environment. These are owned by museums, so it's like, I think they're holding up pretty good.
So when you come to the gallery right now, you won't see furniture sculpture, but it will be up in early July for 3 weeks in Walker Court. It's a really phenomenal work, and the reason we can't show it in the Zach's Pavilion is because you need about a 27-foot high ceiling, And so we really wanted to include it, and we thought we were fine with it, but then we realized the poles go really high, and it's not a work. It's actually not a work we could show really anywhere in the gallery except Walker Court.
They wouldn't let me cut through the ceiling, so I
Yeah,
couldn't.
he did ask to kind of, that's right. Or actually take out some of the floor was the other option, but yeah. So it will be in Walker Court, and this is actually the first time the work has been shown since it was first shown at the Vancouver Art Gallery in 2006, when you had your survey show there. Can you tell us a little bit about how you made this work?
Yeah, sure. I used to kind of do this way of working where I would show up at a museum or a gallery space and make the work there, make the exhibition on site. That's kind of what I did with the whale skeletons and a couple other pieces. And this is maybe the last time I did that. And I was, for my show at the Vancouver Art Gallery, I decided to make something that was a bit more emblematic of my Indigenous background. I'm Daneza from Dene territory, and there's a lot. You see a lot of folks that have teepees up there, and I'd never made one before, so I wanted to make one, and so I was doing research about a lot of the different styles and how on the plains they were made from buffalo skins, and I like the idea that you could make a structure, a habitation with material around your immediate environment. And at the time, I was noticing that a lot of my family were buying these giant, like, home theater style sofas, and I thought that they would make a great stand-in for a buffalo. So I bought like a dozen of them, and I skinned them in the gallery, and we took apart all the wood framing, and we made these long poles, and there you go. It weighs about 500 pounds. Like, it was amazing that we actually got it lifted up. So it'd be great to see it again. I haven't seen it in 15 years. So.
We had a meeting here the other day about how to install it, and it's sort of easy and complicated.
Also, one thing I want to mention about this is when I was in art school, I saw my friend Ken Lum had a show at the Vancouver Art Gallery, and he made these great sculptures using furniture. And that was also a slight kind of nod to Ken in this piece. And he has a lot of thoughts and work and ideas around furniture and ideas of home and whatnot. So
You showed it in exactly the same place in the show, the kind of red donut that he made, the red sort of seating, fantastic. So let's look at a few images together. So, sorry, we have a skull, which you can see at the front of the museum, made with baseballs. Some of the freezer work, some Men of My Family and Moon. Some of the drums, furniture drums on tables. A tombstone, the new work, kind of turtle on filing cabinets, if you like. You're an artist that seems to have a lot of interest in museological sort of apparatus, mounts and pedestals and such. And I think, most contemporary art sort of shies away from those things, and or most contemporary sculpture, the idea of the pedestal is kind of banished. I'm sort of curious what you're doing with freezers and tables and filing cabinets.
Well, I like using ready-made materials for certain things.
What's that?
I like using ready-made materials for certain things. And I think with the freezers especially, that's a project that I kind of started, again, back when I was back home one summer. I was hanging out at where my family lives, and there's a lot of folks who are hunters up there, and they all have deep freezers, and they're all usually outside. And I started putting things on them because I noticed that they looked like these great white museum pedestals, and I would create these elaborate balancing sculptures. And it was interesting seeing who looked at them as sculpture and who just looked at them as kind of like junk and pushed them off. And that really started me thinking about using them as more in a more formal environment, like actually in a museum. So these pieces are in a way portraits or a tribute to where I come from, and they're using very common things you would see up in Fort St. John area, like freezers, car parts, and animal hides. So,
What's in the freezers?
in these freezers? Ice cream.
So filing cabinets?
Yeah, this is a more new piece. I wanted to use filing cabinets for a long time. Back in Vancouver, I was thinking of ways of using them. I saw another artist who did these great things, and he was crushing them. And I really, after I saw that, I'm like, okay, I can't really use filing cabinets. But I made this piece with this tortoiseshell, and these stools in the form of a tortoiseshell, as something to represent Turtle Island and like a representation of the Earth. And I kind of returned to the filing cabinet because I wanted the Earth essentially to be sitting on this like representation of like endless bureaucracy or like paperwork, and so that's kind of what I decided to do with that piece.
What's the turtle made out of?
Rubber-made stools, little plastic Rubber-made stools. Those things I had lying around in my studio for a long time, and I made other work with. Oh, did you lose me? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I made other work with these little stools in the past, but they just kind of sat unused for a long time. So, and I did a kind of project with garbage bins that I made these large carapace sculptures out of in different museums, and so those all got recycled. So I wanted to have something like that represented in this show.
There's a little bit of the geodesic dome and that you see in the drawing. And the
Yeah,
turtle.
I've never really been able to make a geodesic dome. I've tried, but like they're too perfect in a way. Like I can't mess it up somehow.
Can you talk a little bit about how you made that form, the turtle form?
Just trial and error. Like again in the archive, when I was making a lot of the work, I had friends that just kind of would photograph or videotape me. So if you might see old footage of me trying to build a whale sculpture, and it's the same thing. It was like just trying out different things.
Yeah, I mean, I met you while you were working on this. You were working on it for quite a long time, and I think your shoulder was a little bit sore, and you were kind of exhausted and slightly frustrated by this object. There's really like a lot of building up of material that you then go in and cut away. It's quite a physical activity. People might not realize that.
Yeah, I mean, I worked on it all winter, and at one point I had to have I had surgery. It was very minor, but I think like the painkillers had some sort of like effect on, because I completely had to go back to the drawing board at one point and start over. But I use materials that are like fairly common and affordable, so it's like I can just go get more if I need them, kind of thing.
It's got a little bit of futurism in it as well. When I look at it, I think of Star Trek or the Thunderbirds or Star Wars and some spaceship that's going to take off and perhaps take some people somewhere else or some animals, I'm not sure what, but it feels like it might take off.
Yeah.
So just want to look at a few more images with you. Tarandus, which is a work with deer hide and kind of fiber optic cable, is that right? Downstairs. Dragonfly is kind of a series of jerry cans we have that Brian has drilled into. Men of My Family, the freezer work, which we talked about, with the car parts and the drum forms, the freezer. The furniture sculptures, Walking Heart with the kind of drum technology. Oh, we have one more, sorry, yeah. So 5-Year Universe, a print that you made in 2013, shown 2 different ways here, you can see. When I look at this work, these sculptures that were made from 2008 onwards, I'm just kind of curious about the new sort of sculptural vocabulary that you're introducing in your work. There are no Air Jordans to be seen, and you're working with a very different set of materials that I think are really influenced by your experience in kind of northern landscapes, more rural landscapes. And I just want to know if you could open up that a bit for the audience, what's happening in this body of work, or these different works.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when I was living in Vancouver, this is before I left the city. Like, I lived in cities for about 20 or so years, and I don't think I was ever quite comfortable living in the city. So I spent a lot of time out in nature, either by myself or with friends or with family. And that was one of the great things about living in Vancouver, is that its accessibility to wilderness. But I often would go back home, back up to the northeast of BC, and I started spending quite a bit of time there from about 2006 to 2009. That's where I made like the gas can work and whatnot. But the piece that you were just showing there, I also had I did a fellowship at the Smithsonian, and I met all sorts of Native American artists, and they all had prints that they would that they traded, like drawings or paintings, and I didn't have any prints to trade, and it got me interested about the idea and the history of printmaking, especially in the Inuit art. And I just really like the idea of trying, just like how a hide was once something sculptural and it becomes flat, I wanted to somehow represent that in sculptural form. And so I made these series of prints and drums using elk and moose hide. And I cut the circles out for the drums and made drums out of furniture in my house, and made these prints using silver ink. And my assistant and I just walked over top of this polyethylene foam to create these very ghostly, almost like moon-like, or
almost calendar, or somehow there's a sense of time.
Yeah,
time,
they felt otherworldly.
landscapes. Mm-hmm.
And I never really did make prints on paper. I tried, but I've become such a like 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional based person now. So
you talk about these a little bit.
yeah. So around that time, I was back up north, and I was actually at the Fort St. John Friendship Center. I stumbled upon a beading workshop, and I met a couple young gals up there, young artists, and they were doing interesting work with beading. And I was interested in trying that myself, but I'm not really great with tiny little things.
Why
Like
is
I'm
that?
not,
Why is that?
I don't have the hands for it. But I kind of abandoned beading. But I really like the idea that it's this like, much like digital technology, it's creating these images out of very small pieces. And I decided to try to do a reverse of that by, instead of an additive process, do a subtractive process. So I started to drill holes, and I was using these gas cans for other attempts at making some sculpture, and I wasn't happy with it. So I decided to use them to do these kind of beadwork inspired sculptures. So.
I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about these, this work alongside these particular walking hearth, these kind of furniture drums, if you like, they seem to be really related, but it's almost like one is like the city art and the other one's the country art, if that's rare. I don't know.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Like, these are kind of a tribute or an ode to my family. And this piece is called The Men of My Family, who I have a lot of drummers in my family. And so this is kind of a tribute to them. And then I used to have a lot of modern furniture, but I used a lot of it to make these sculptures. And maybe that's like, I'm half my father is European, so I'm half European, and these are kind of a tribute to maybe that side of the family.
Okay.
So, I loved those chairs. I should have kept them.
I think they're some of the most beautiful works of the show, and I guess I find them really compelling, and I think they open up a whole new vocabulary for what kind of sculpture can be, and it's really great to have them in the gallery. It's really great to see them here. It's the first time they've shown in Canada, isn't it? Actually?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it is, because, just go forward a bit. Yeah, so you've made your home in a number of different places. I think when I met you in the late 90s, you were already living in Vancouver. You'd moved from Fort St. John to go to school in Vancouver. And when I met you, I think you'd already lived for some time in Montreal and New York. And you'd come back to Vancouver, where you stayed, made the prototypes, various other works, the whales and such. A really formative place for you. And in 2014, you decided to leave the city, and you're now living in the Okanagan on a ranch. I'm just kind of curious, has that move changed how you're working, how you're making, how you're thinking? Or do you miss Vancouver? Would you rather still be in the city, or is it?
Well, it's close.
Happened to
I
you?
live close enough that it's well, for Canada, it's like 5-hour drive.
Sure. It's not so far.
That's close.
No, it's
And
close. It's close.
that's like, I don't know, I get to the coast quite a bit. I miss my friends there and stuff, but I do like living out there and on the ranch. And it's like maybe a terribly middle-aged thing where you like go back to the thing that you ran away from in your youth. And like, I grew up very rurally and in agriculture and stuff, and I really found that I kind of need that in my life now. So I have a really great studio there, and satellite internet.
So I visited Brian a few times up here while working on the project, and very gracious host. I stayed with him, and he opened up a lot of what he had been doing to me that I wasn't aware of. And he, since he's been making work with Air Jordans, he's kept every box that a pair of sneakers come in, and I think he has probably over 1,000 boxes. And he's filled those boxes, I think when he moved, and over time, living in Vancouver, he filled those boxes with things that were inspirational, things he wanted to tuck away. And he sat down with me for a few days, and we opened them, looked inside. And then I thought it might be interesting to find a way to show the contents of the boxes here at the gallery. So there's a room devoted to the kind of so-called archive. Some of the empty boxes are there on show to kind of give a sense of what houses a lot of these objects. And on the monitors, you get to see some of the contents of the boxes along with Brian's own photographs. In fact, he does take photographs. He's not a bad photographer. It's not as bad as he thinks. And there's quite a lot of video material, so we have probably 2 or 3 hours of video material. I'm curious what made you want to bring that kind of material forward. Some of it's quite personal, in fact. A lot of analog photographs connected to your family life growing up.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just wanted to start sharing a bit more of my past. I've been a very private person, and images like this have snuck out, and people kind of know that I've spent a lot of time up in the mountains and whatnot. So I wanted to kind of start talking about that or sharing sharing some of where I came from. Also, everybody who's visited my studio, they all kind of lose it when they see this giant wall of shoeboxes, and they all want to know what's in them. So I decided it's kind of like a project that's going to be ongoing. It's going to continue, but I can kind of share some of that now.
So there are about 3,000, I think 500 images on the monitors. There's a kind of 5-hour program you can watch. There's beautiful images of trips you've taken into ancestral lands. Also, these things are in some of the boxes. What are they?
Those are berry pickers, and I just found them at the ranch. Like, when I bought that place, had been badly neglected, and it's a beautiful old property. But yeah, so it's been taken a lot of effort to turn it around and fix it up. But we keep finding some amazing kind of things there. Yeah, I think that's just from a thrift store. But I love the title.
Yeah. So a little bit of driftwood in the front or some other kind of wood, just in case you don't like logs. I guess there's also a lot of material in there too about process, about how he makes. Some great footage of him trying to piece together a whale, some great footage of him eviscerating a sneaker. It's a lot about process, a lot about making exhibitions as well. So interesting if you have the time to take with it. So yeah, we have also a film in this exhibition, or a kind of film installation, video installation. Can you talk a little bit about why you wanted to go back into this film? Brian worked on this with Dwayne Linklater in 2012, and they produced a kind of silent narrative film about moose hunting. And I thought it was kind of finished and done, and we talked about showing it here, and Brian had some other ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always wanted, this is something Dwayne and I were both interested in all along, is that to try to represent much more of the immersive experience of being out there. And we had talked about doing it more like an installation, and a multi-channel installation. And the opportunity came up to do that here. And Dwayne decided that he would like to do his own cut of the film, and this one could be mine. So I worked with a really great editor, and she and I kind of sewed together about 5 hours of footage across 5 screens. And it's not that much longer than the original, but it offers a much kind of wider, I guess, peripheries of the experience. And yeah, so that's kind of, and it just loops. It's not really like the other one had much more of a kind of almost cinematic sensibility to it, I think.
Is it fair to think about your process of going back into that film a little bit about how you think about envisioning potential in other objects? So the idea of the way you look at a sneaker and can kind of make it be or see it as something else. The same with the plastic patio chairs, the idea that you go back into the film. Is there a similar impulse
Similar,
there?
but I mean, with something like this, like the act of going hunting, it has a built-in narrative. So it's like, it'd be very confusing to people if you started to kind of cut that up too much. Mm-hmm. So I kept certain things intact from the original. Mm-hmm. But Dwayne and I decided to use film rather than video because we actually didn't know if the film would even turn out. Mm-hmm. Like, we used a professional cameraman and rented equipment, but we liked how the medium we chose was kind of mirroring the act of hunting itself. Mm-hmm. We didn't know if we were going to get an animal when we went out there. Mm-hmm. So it was, at one point I thought maybe I should just show the reels, but there's a lot of just boring walking on a trail footage. So it's easier if you can break that up into multiple channels. So.
So we talked about the prototypes earlier, the 23 prototypes, or prototype for new understanding. You finished making those in 2005. You did a little bit of work with Air Jordans and sneakers since, but not really very much. You kind of left it alone. And shortly after you moved to the ranch, I sort of imagine you're sitting in your new studio trying to figure out what next. And somehow the Air Jordan lands on your desk again. How does that work?
Well, when I was living out there, I get approached by all sorts of different people and media to do interviews about the work I did with Air Jordans, and I kind of realized that I'm like forever tied to that product. And I got a call one day from ESPN, and they wanted to do an interview with me. And I thought, if sports culture is now like interested in visual culture and visual art, then I should probably pick these up again and see what I could do with them. They also started making them in a huge variety of colors, which they never used to do that. So I kind of secretly started buying them again. They're also a lot easier to buy now online. Like when I started making them back in the 90s, there was no online shopping. So you had to physically go get them. So now it's a little bit easier. And so I decided to try different ways of making them this time. And initially it was like, I thought it might be interesting to use the same tools that were used to make the shoes, using heavy equipment or heavy shop equipment and industrial sewing machines and stuff. And so you can see examples where like I've run the shoes through bandsaw so they all have the identical cut, things like that. And then I eventually kind of went back to the handheld and the hand tools for the most recent work.
Something like this, I guess, when I first looked at it, I guess it's one of the first works to also introduce kind of natural material, the leather, along with the shoe. But you've really been able to. It seems, in a sense, there's a kind of virtuosity with the shoe now, and that you can find feathers in soles of sneakers, like where you found whalebones and somehow whalebones in chairs. And these works also, Warrior One, seem to have kind of a kind of more serious or perhaps aggressive tone when you compare them to the first prototype series, which somehow feel almost innocent in comparison to these works, which are, I think, in some ways much more ambitious, larger, really testing what you can do at this time in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I tend not to look at consumer goods the same way most people do, I don't think. I look at their possibilities beyond their use. And so things like the chairs and stuff, I became very confident about how, and I also knew their structural limitations and how far I could push them. And so working with the trainers was pretty much the same thing. And I also started work, because a lot of my work has wound up in museums, I've become quite close contact with a lot of conservationists, because Air Jordans really weren't meant to last beyond 5 years. So museums and collectors are trying to, preserve them as long as possible. So I've kind of figured out a way that I could cut out most of the adhesives, and that's kind of how I started arriving at the idea of the feather. Just how I could kind of cut out certain parts. But it also is it's very similar to like gutting a salmon. Like it has very similar motions into like field dressing animals or cleaning fish and stuff. So
there's also a sense of kind of using other parts of the kind of shoe, if you like, the lace, and kind of finding fur and feathers in the laces. So like in this example, in Aldrox, you kind of see the tufting and such.
Yeah, so I started to like pay more attention to like a lot of traditional ways of making things and indigenous technology. You can see that in the drums and stuff. But I saw these caribou tufted garments and artworks that I was really kind of fascinated by. So I did this whole series that I kind of attribute to a lot of Inuit artists and stuff. And that's where I kind of tried using the laces a bit more.
And the title of this one?
This is Kinujuak, or, oh no, Owl Drugs. Owl Drugs is a pharmacy in Vancouver in the downtown east side that, like, I just always loved the name of it. And this, to me, reminded me of some sort of like tripped out psychedelic owl.
I think one of the things we see for the first time in the show, maybe more publicly, but when you started making this new series, they're all many of them are wearable. The Warrior series in particular, I think, are all wearable.
Yeah.
And you made a new work for the show where we actually have a performer dancer wearing one of your works, and I'm just curious.
Yeah. So the
you
new
moved
works are a lot more wearable. And I think over the last 10 years or so, I started to attend a lot more powwow in BC and Alberta. And I was out in southern Alberta and I saw these like Cheyenne dog soldiers and I think at a Sutina reserve, and I was so blown away by their presence.
Yeah, just invite anyone to look up the Cheyenne dog soldier when they go home. The images are quite incredible. Yeah.
So that's kind of where I started making more of these kind of war bonnet pieces. I really wanted them to be alive and to have this very same movement. So I kind of like trial and error again, tried to make something that had the same sort of power and presence. Mm-hmm. But these are, I mean, this thing is like 24 pairs of shoes, so that's actually quite heavy.
I couldn't lift it. I tried. When it arrived here, I couldn't pick it up. Yeah.
So it's like something I have to consider is like how to make the work a bit more lighter and stuff like that, if it's going to be worn. So.
Yeah, there's a dancer wearing this last night, and he really, I was thinking about his neck the whole time, but he really made this work look like it was made of feathers, and I thought that was incredibly impressive in the sense that you didn't feel the sense of the weight of this work on his body in any way, so it's very beautiful. I want to thank you, Brian, for this talk tonight, and thank you for the great privilege of working with you and making the show, and you've been so generous tonight in this talk. A massive thank you to you.
Oh, you're welcome.